This is a ridiculous amount of yarn. Let's turn it into a blanket. I'm not going to be making just any blanket. I'm going to be making a temperature blanket. What is a temperature blanket? If you're in the loop, pun intended, to the crochet community, then you already know about this trend. But if you aren't, a temperature blanket is a handmade knitted or crochet blanket that typically has a row representing each day of the year. You'll typically have a selection of yarns where each color is representative of a certain temperature range for your area or whatever area you've selected. Usually people start it on January 1st, but you can also do it for any date range, and then a row will be added to the blanket each day. I know what you're thinking. I can't crochet a row every day, and you really don't have to. I will share how to find historical weather data for either doing this year or 20 years ago. If you wanted to, you could even do the city and year you were born, so they can be a really meaningful keepsake. So why am I making a temperature blanket? If you are new here, hi, I am Morgan, and I like to share my cozy hobbies, mostly reading and knitting and crochet. Recently, I moved abroad to Australia. If you want to know more about our move abroad, I'll link that video up here. I really wanted to make a temperature blanket to commemorate our time living abroad in Australia. We are going to be here for a year or two for my husband's work, so it felt like such a special, personalized way to really honor the time we're going to be spending here. I took a lot of inspiration from TL Yarn Crafts, who even made a blanket to commemorate the first year of her and her husband's marriage, which is so special. So whether or not you find a very special why that makes you want to make a temperature blanket, or if you just want to commemorate this year in a range of temperatures, it's such a creative way to really capture a moment in time and inspire you to crochet more often. Next, I needed to select yarns. This is such a fun step in the process. I really wanted to use acrylic for this project because it's durable, it's washable. I also wanted a yarn that was more lightweight. I just spent $100 on yarn. Let me explain. So I have been planning a temperature blanket for the time that we're living in Australia. So I really wanted to buy yarn here, but the problem is I need to be able to find a yarn that has a wide selection of colors. I've been trying to get away from buying from big box stores as much with my yarn. However, it is the most affordable thing, especially when you're buying as much yarn as I need to make a huge blanket. So I actually purchased on Hobby yarns. So I got together in a Canva document all the yarn colorways, and I was moving them all around to figure out what I would want my color range to look like for this blanket. And I came up with this, and I was really loving the way this looked. So I went ahead and ordered it, and now I'll have to wait 2 weeks for it to come in the mail. I had selected 11 colors, so I needed to have that many temperature ranges, but I really wanted to do Celsius because that is the way that they track temperatures here in Australia, so I felt like it would really be a good opportunity for me to learn how to convert the temperatures better. When I was coming up with my color chart and temperature key, I really wanted to come up with fun names that I could reference that would be just for me, so I just could not help myself but to give them all Swiftie coded names. But when you're making your chart, you're also going to need to decide whether you're going to be following the high or low temperatures for the day. But the way I wanted to keep track of my temperatures was following the historical weather data online so that I didn't have to write it down each day, and it was a lot less stress. But when I was looking at the website, they had a 9 a.m. temperature and a 3 p.m. temperature also available. So I decided the 3 p.m. temperature was a really good way to go because it wasn't the highest temperature, maybe a median or average number for the day. I also looked looked at the past year in my area so that I would have a good idea of where my highest and lowest temperature should be so that my hottest and coldest colors would still be represented in my key and on my blanket. And it appeared that my middle temperatures would be used a lot more, so I tried to give them slightly smaller ranges so that I wouldn't just have a block of one color. Now it's time to make a chart. I like to work smarter, not harder, especially when I'm inspired at the beginning of a project. I'm willing to put in the time that maybe I won't be as motivated to put in later. So I opened up Google Sheets and created a formula to be able to just input the temperature and it would automatically populate what yarn color that correlates with. And this is going to make it so much easier as the year goes on. And from here on, it will be really plug and play for me to just go onto the historical weather data, input the temperatures, and it will just populate what colors I need to work up. And I plan to only really do that like at the end of each month. I don't foresee myself really getting caught up on this blanket because I'm always working on so many projects, but I definitely plan on documenting this process and sharing updates, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't already so that you don't miss the future updates. Next, it is time to pick a pattern. I highly suggest you just scroll through Pinterest because there are so many ways you can do a temperature blanket. There are granny squares, there are striped blankets. I've seen people do this in scarves for a much smaller scale project, and I've even seen people do temperature snakes. I took a lot of inspiration from TL Yarncraft and her Tunisian crochet ripple blanket. I don't do Tunisian crochet. I really want to learn one day, but I didn't want to learn on a new project. So I am taking inspiration from it. I'm going to be following the ripple moss stitch crochet blanket pattern from I Can Crochet That on YouTube. I will have it linked down below. And once I knew what blanket I was going to be doing, I needed to decide on a size. I really wanted like an Afghan size blanket, like pretty large. So for whatever yarn you've chosen, it will say the recommended hook size as well as the gauge for that yarn. Typically gauge means how many stitches are going to be in 4 inches. So if you want a 60-inch blanket, you need to divide that by 4 and then work up as many stitches as your gauge tells you you need to get 60 inches. The pattern I was going to be following needed a multiple of 19 plus 18. I wanted to add a note that this formula works really well for if you are just doing straight single stitches for your blanket, but for the ripple moss stitch blanket, she mentions that the ripple will take up an extra inch or 2, so you want to add that onto your foundation chain. So I did that, but once I worked up the ripple pattern, it actually ate up more than that. So I needed to do the math again, and I ended up working up a foundation chain of 284 stitches to end up with a blanket that will be 60 inches with the ripple pattern. For my foundation chain, it measured 4 or 5 inches more, so it was like 64 or 65 inches, but once I did the ripple pattern, it now is actually falling exactly at 60 inches in width, which I'm really excited about because that'll be a really good size blanket, but that means I'm working a lot of stitches back and forth. So this will be a very fun, mindless project to work on while I am watching shows. The only thing I'll have to pay attention to is what the next color is, and I'm so thankful I worked up that amazing chart to be able to follow. That will make it so much easier. And my foundation chain is in the color golden, which represents the temperature of the first day we landed here in Canberra, Australia. The 3 p.m. temperature that day was 25.3 degrees Celsius, which is about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I began the pattern for the ripple blanket. I was following the tutorial while carefully counting up my stitches, and my first 2 rows are actually in the same golden color. And then I'll be switching to rust. Good morning. I am working on my temperature blanket. This one is looking a mess because I'm currently using it and I struggled to find the end. I like to do a center pull, so sometimes that means pulling out a huge yarn bar in order to find the end. When we flew out from the States, it was going into springtime there, and when we landed here, we were headed into fall. So the color temperatures are obviously vastly different here. My husband even mentioned maybe I should have done my blanket starting in Virginia at the beginning of the year and then ending up here. And that was a cool idea too, but I really want this to just be like our time in Australia. On the first of each month, I'm gonna do a bobble stitch in the middle of each ripple repeat to signify the beginning of each month. I think that will be a really nice like textural addition to this blanket. We landed here on March 28th, so I did a few rows before getting to the first of a month. This is the 8th row of the blanket, and there are already 5 colors represented, which is really cool. I think there are either 4 or 5 rows of golden in here already. But as I said, we are very much in fall now, so I don't think there's gonna be very much more golden, especially now. I obviously can show you the charts on the screen of what colors are gonna be coming up, but it's still gonna be very exciting to see the colors start to form on the blanket and see how they work together. I think that this green obviously looks very contrasting from these right now, but once I start working up more rows of cool tone colors, I'm just wondering how it's all going to look together and if it's going to be cohesive. My edges are looking pretty neat so far. I've been weaving in the ends as I do my turns at the end, which is going to save me a big headache at the end of this 365 days, not having to weave in a ton of ends. I am at the end of this row and I wanted to film a little tutorial on how I am changing colors seamlessly as well as keeping really straight edges and weaving in my tails as I go so that I don't have 365 tails to weave in at the end of this blanket. So in order to do a seamless join of color, you want to bring the new color in as you work the last stitch on the row. The color I'm currently working with is Cheshire Cat, but I'm going to be doing the next row in rows. So in order to transition colors, I'm going to pick up the loops for my stitch. If you're doing a single crochet, there will only be 2 loops on your hook, but because I'm doing a single crochet 2 together, there are 3. I'm going to hold the yarn behind my work and I'm going to hold the new yarn with a bit of a tail, and then I'm going to pull the yarn through the new color and chain 1 to turn. I have now turned my work and I'm going to go ahead and trim this yarn with a little bit of a tail, and then I'm going to tie the 2 tails together so that it's a bit more secure. And then I'm going to get this yarn out of my way because we've now joined on the new color, and then I'm going to hold these 2 yarns behind my work but on top of the stitches so that I can weave them into my stitches as I work them. If you are doing a regular single crochet blanket, you will just single crochet over these threads. And I'm just going to work my stitches right over top of those threads, tucking them in each time, giving them a little tug so that they stay underneath the work. The longer you cut your threads, the more secure they will be, but I don't cut them too long because I don't want them here in this decrease part. And you're just going to continue holding it under your work. So as you can see, that offers a much more seamless join and a very straight, neat edge, even with these contrasting colors and changing colors every single row. It's going to be so much easier, especially at the end of this project, to not have to weave in all those ends. This is my 11th row and there are already so many colors represented. It's coming out very beautifully and I'm so excited about this temperature blanket. We have been here just at 2 months now and I'm so excited to start working on this blanket and to have so many rows to catch up on. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future updates on my temperature blanket. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it very inspiring. Let me know if you are planning or working on a temperature blanket. If not, I'd love to hear what you are currently working on. If we aren't already, make sure you follow me on Instagram so that we can be friends. And I am wishing you a very cozy